Hello, people of YouTube land, and those that are part of the Cringe Crew community. Cringe Crew gaming community Discord.
There it was.
Fuck.
Found it.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do this without without ums, because the counter's broken, so therefore we can't keep track. So this is probably gonna be a long and painful podcast. Where was I? Oh yeah,
The very beginning, it's where you were.
I hate this so much. Well, those that follow, hello people YouTube land, those that follow Ted and I and Hayley on Twitch, those that are part of the Cringe Crew gaming community Discord. Oh god.
Oh my god, just move past it.
Yeah,
Just full send it.
And this Spotify shit. Whoever's listening to this on Spotify, this is Cringe Crew Gaming movie review podcast. And we are doing Halloween stuff, spooky films, and we still are continuing with Hayley's picks. This one be 1982's Poltergeist. So we will go with a background on this. Obviously released in 1982. June 4th, 1982 specifically. Directed by Tobe Hooper, who also directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, this was written and produced by Steven Spielberg. And, there's some, strange things about this movie that says Steven Spielberg all over the goddamn thing. And when we get into background, in more depth, we'll see, that confusion on whoever actually directed it, if it was Spielberg or Tobe Hooper, or if they collaborate with both, is very, very vague, because it depends on who you fucking ask, apparently. Okay. Fuck it. We have a budget of $10.7 million and at a box office return of $121.7 million. Wait, $10.7 million was the budget, and $121.7 million is the box office return. This was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and was the 8th highest grossing film of 1982. And released the same year as E.T., which is why Spielberg was not contractually able to direct this movie. And he ended up enlisting Tobe Hooper due to liking his work on Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a slasher film called The Funhouse. Now, the original concept of Poltergeist was to be a sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with the title of Watch the Night Skies, then eventually turned into Night Skies. But that movie was never made, and Tobe Hooper was not really interested in the sci-fi elements and suggested that they would collaborate and turn this story into a ghost story. And so Night Skies basically got turned into Poltergeist and then also E.T. So really, Night Skies was actually kind of like a combination of both, but kind of weird. That being said, for cast, we have Craig T. Nelson as Stephen Freeling, his wife Joe Beth Williams playing Steve Freeling's wife Diane Freeling. For the daughter of this, the older daughter, we have Dominique Dunn as Dana Freeling. For the son, Oliver Robbins as Robbie Freeling. And then for the youngest daughter, Heather O'Rourke as Carol Ann Freeling. We also have Beatrice Straight as Dr. Martha Lesh. Michael McManus as Ben Tuthill. Richard Lawson as Dr. Ryan Mitchell. Zelda Rubinstein as the medium Tangina Barons. And James Karen as Mr. Lewis Teague. And I think that's about like as much as that we have. The weird thing about this movie is that this is kind of listed as a cursed film for whatever reason, mainly because like a lot of the cast like passed on in a short period of time. Although oddly enough, despite popular belief, Heather O'Rourke didn't like die shortly after this was made. She actually died shortly after the third movie was made, because yeah, this is this is made into a trilogy because all horror films for some reason have to be a trilogy.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah.
Money.
Other cast members that actually passed away were Dominique Dunn and I forget, there was a couple other people that passed away due to like having like previous illnesses while shooting on set. But due to like several members of the cast like dying in a short period of time, this is considered a curse movie. That being said, as I was stated before, it depends on who you ask on whether Steven Spielberg was the true director or at least a co-director in this. It is said that, depending on who you ask, Steven Spielberg had like a lot of control over this movie, while other people said like, no, this is very much a Tobe Hooper film. And if you ask Steven Spielberg or Tobe Hooper was the director. Like Steven Spielberg like suggested a few things, was on set all the time. And so I think it's probably a combination that they just both collaborated as opposed to like one single thing. Although I will state that this is very eerily more so reminiscent of a Steven Spielberg film as opposed to a Tobe Hooper film, but that's mainly because when I think Tobe Hooper, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre as opposed to Poltergeist.
Yeah, I the Spielberg element of like theatrical was definitely there. I'm not as familiar with Hooper's work to be able to compare it to everything else. You know what I mean? Like just having seen Texas Chainsaw, I mean, it just didn't feel like that at all. It felt definitely like a Spielberg if that's the only comparison point you get. But it also wasn't straight up just a Spielberg. So
right.
I get where there's influence from both.
And with that being said, I guess we'll go into likes and dislikes.
Hayley, why don't you start with likes? Because I think you guys have a longer likes list than I do.
I mean, I don't know. I really enjoyed this movie.
This is the first time you've seen it too, right?
Yeah, I had never seen I'd seen the remake first. The remake is where I started with this movie, and I never got around to watching the original. I think that like what I liked about this one specifically is I don't typically like super long movies. I don't like 2-3 hour long movies because I don't have the attention span to sit there and watch it. But this one was different. I enjoyed it. It had its moments where, you know, things looked kind of crappy, you know, an 80s movie, all that good stuff. But I think they did really well with most of the special effects. There was enough like comedy elements to it. There were a few scenes that were, you know, fueled by humor. I don't think it was necessarily like a scary movie. It had a few jump scares here and there, but overall, so far the best one that we've watched, in my opinion. So far.
I mean, I'd agree. I'd say that this is more so like a oddly enough, like an action adventure movie as opposed to like a horror film, but there are horror elements into it.
Well, and I also not saying like the acting was phenomenal, but I think
It was very
in comparison to the movies that we've watched so far, I think that it is the best acting out of the three. And I think that they all did really well aside from a couple.
I will say that, like, as far as like being that like horror adventure kind of crossover, right? Like, there's something about horror movies where the target audience is children, right? So like,
Yeah.
There's like possession movies that possess kids so that it's an extra element of terror for adults, right? But like, this was absolutely focused on, hey, the poltergeist is there to scare the kids, right? And I think it does a good job at like setting the tone for this movie, that like, we're not here to make every adult shit their pants in a movie theater, right? It's like, hey, there's some horror elements, but like, you can bring the family to this and get a scare.
Oddly enough about this, this movie, along with Gremlins, are the two movies that are the reason why PG-13 is now a rating. Because prior to those two movies, it was just PG, and parents didn't understood that PG stood for parental guidance, as in the parents are supposed to watch the movie and then see if it's okay for their kids. Yeah, well, they didn't, so, like, the scene where the dude's pulling, like, his face apart, and also the different, gory effects that are in Gremlins, cause parents to be slightly pissed off that they were terrorized, their children were being terrorized, although I'm pretty sure nowadays this would probably get an R rating for that scene alone, just because,
I don't know.
PG-13 is very, toned down now.
The rest of this was pretty tame.
Our movies are pretty toned down by now. Like, they have their different levels of R rating, but I don't think that this would get an R rating for that. That scene, especially now,
it probably might get PG-13. Well, I know it's a dated scene, but you get what I'm saying. That a lot of PG-13 isn't really like.
I mean, even like, so I'm thinking about like the Purge, right? The Purge doesn't have that much stuff that's like outwardly violent or graphic, right? But like, I mean, that gets an R rating, right? Compared to slasher films, Hayley. I'm not saying that it's not a graphic movie. Don't get me wrong. I see your judgmental look. You get out of here.
It's not judgmental. It's just that, like, I mean, I get what you're saying, but also
it's in terms of like, horror movies that are about violence, right, rather than fear. Like, The Purge is relatively docile, and I think this is significantly below The Purge, right, where The Purge gets a R rating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this would probably still get a PG-13, to be honest with you, but
yeah, I mean, well, this was PG, but
right, for the time. Anyway, yeah, I think the whole thing sets a good tone in the idea that, like, because they're haunting children, right, it's not here to terrorize you as an adult. I hesitate to use family friendly, but I get the idea that, like, if you have more mature kids, like, this isn't something that you could hesitate to bring your whole family to. Yeah, I wouldn't bring a toddler in, but if you got kids who are 10 plus and they've seen some shit, like, it wouldn't be the end of the world for you to take them to this movie. I think they do a really good job at setting that tone.
Yeah, sorry, you want to?
No. Go ahead.
I was about to say, I agree completely, and I'm glad that you actually kind of like made that observation that most of the scary stuff, even though like a lot of it does happen to like the mom, most of it is directed towards the children.
Well, that's because, especially in most horror movies, children are innocent. They are. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't place the word.
That deserve it, right?
No, they're innocent. They haven't been influenced, and it's appealing to a lot of these creatures in horror movies.
And the same as what you were saying, Stallman, is that, like, the horror is focused towards the kids, right? Like, they're the intended target, but they leave the acting to the adults, which I think is like a really good balance, where you're not forcing child actors to go outside their scope to make a shittier movie. Like I say it again, like the tone was set really well that allowed the plot to play out. Like it did a really good job at what it was doing.
I think this movie was also shot pretty well as well, like just cinematography wise, not really talking about like special effects.
Yeah.
But like
I thought the camera angles were super notable. They filmed in a house that was not necessarily easy to film around, and I think the camera was always in the right place, that you felt like you got the full scope of the action. Lighting was tough, especially because of the nature of the monsters, right? Or the entities, I guess, for lack of a better word. That, like, even lighting was really good. And for the most part, I think sound was pretty quality. I had a couple moments in time where, like, I felt like it was only out of my right headphone, but, like, it wasn't bad sound. It was just badly balanced left to right.
Yeah, I mean, everything was pretty good except for, like, the whispering scenes for me. Like, those were kind of a pain. I also want to attribute that to Plex.
Also the unnecessary whispering. Like, whispering is one thing, it's fine, I get it, but also the fact that, like, let's do a scene of straight dialogue for 8 consecutive minutes that is only whispering with people who don't know how to whisper is kind of fucking stupid.
Right.
That and the fact that everyone was awake, it was kind of pointless.
I also have to say, like even though like the acting isn't like 100% spectacular, I do believe that the actors, especially the adult actors playing like the characters that they do play, do a fantastic job. And even though some characters aren't necessarily as fleshed out, it seems like the performance makes them seem a little bit more fleshed out than they are, like, just from the script alone.
Writing does help with that too. I mean, they only build characters in when they're important, so it's not like you see any characters with downtime. If they're writing a character with lines, they're giving those lines purpose, which I think does some favors in that department.
Which I have to say, my favorite scene in the entire movie is when, like, they're going to rescue the youngest child from, like, I guess the spirit realm. And then, like, the medium's like, I'm going after her, and, you know,
she's just like, you've never done this before.
You never done this before. It's like, neither of you. You're right. Go.
It's just like no hesitation. I unnecessarily laughed at that for a solid 8 minutes.
It's such an unnecessary comedy and such a tense moment, but I couldn't help but fucking geek out, dude.
I just enjoy that.
That's what I like about this movie, is that it had, like, because I've seen horror movies where they either focus too much on just the comedy and not enough on, like, what the movie's actually supposed to be. But they had that, like, balance of, hey, let's insert, you know, some comedic moments, but not take away too much from, like, the actual plot.
Yeah, I honestly think, like, the balancing of, like, horror and comedy in this was done a lot better in this movie than, shall we say, like, American Werewolf in London, where a lot of the comedy kind of, like, killed the tense moments.
Yeah.
But that's really, I kind of have, it's like, I like the story, how it kind of flows. Definitely like the ending.
Just shoving the TV out the door is probably one of my favorite parts of the movie.
I very much liked the way that this movie kept you kind of in the dark. You could feel the intensity of the spirit realm without having to see anything. You could understand the like parents' emotions to get their kid back without necessarily understanding what's happening to them. And at the end, you didn't get left with this gigantic confusion going, well, I need more, which is a fun trope for horror movies to create that sequel that's, hey, another low budget, high income film because people liked the first one. I also like I do want to stick on cinematography for a second, because I think there were layers to it. Particularly the scene where the camera moves and focuses up the stairs. I think they do like a really good job at balancing the people coming in with their cameras versus the cameras from the film, and how those two things interact. I think that was really well done. And I also think that the moments that are intense are like properly intense. They're not so intense that they're jump scaring you because they're loud and bold and passionate when everything else is quiet. You feel exactly what you're supposed to feel in a way that doesn't overwhelm you, which I very much appreciate.
I also... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to use this to transition to dislikes, so if you got more to say, have at it.
One more thing that I enjoyed about this is like, I've noticed that there are times in a lot of movies that I've watched where they'll mention things and never touch base on them. I was thinking about it when we got to the scene where his boss is taking him out to like where the cemetery is and talking about moving them. And then he mentions that the entire area was built where a cemetery used to be. And I thought they were just going to kind of leave that and not touch base on it again.
No, it comes back.
But I liked how they followed up with it.
I always... Sorry.
I can't stand when they don't follow up with things that they mention that is important to plot, and they just kind of walk over it.
Also kind of makes sense why that particular family is the only ones that are experiencing like a haunting, because the dad works for the real estate company that moved the headstones and built houses on top of the graves, which I always keep misremembering that quote as like, it's like, you cheap bastard, you moved the headstones, but you forget but you didn't move the bodies is the actual thing. I keep thinking like you moved the headstones, but you didn't move the graves. I keep thinking it's like that, but it's the former. And I don't know why, but it's just how it is. But I think that is a big, huge cool thing about that is that they really follow through and actually explain why they're the only ones experiencing a haunting, even though the entire town's built on top of a graveyard.
Yeah.
I want to play off that a little bit to take this to one more like and then transition to dislikes. I want to say that like the effects, especially of the graves coming out of the ground, were really well done. Like the effect of things emerging from the ground, there were spinning open doors on caskets, the placement of the bodies, the timing of all of them, like the effects that were really well done were phenomenally well done. There are lots of pieces that like even by today's standards were marvelous placement. And to some credit,
especially with the house caving in.
I will give that to Spielberg. That like I know that was his production influence. Like that felt very Spielberg. But to that extent, to transition into dislikes, my biggest takeaway from this film is that it doesn't hold up. The parts that are good are really, really good, but there are so many parts that like would have been outdated by the late 80s for this movie.
Especially the scene where the guy's pulling his face apart, like that's like
the pulling his face apart, the skeleton looking face emerging from the closet in the spirit realm, right? Like,
well, and even just the first scene where they open the door and it's like everything's spinning around and it's all like
cartoon stuff.
Fake. It goes through her hand when she like pulls her hand back.
Yeah, the things that do well are really good. The things that don't do well age this movie so badly. Like, you could have watched this in the 90s and said that this movie was outdated. There are parts that's not true, but there were a lot of parts that were pretty glaring and obvious. And I think it was more like if it was one or two things, I think that you could ignore it, but I think it was pretty abundant. The things that didn't hold up. That just kind of really like, man, this was probably really good in 1982 and never again. You know? The other part is Hayley, I want to play off of what you said where like they bring plot points back, because they did do a good job of it at some points, but I didn't think it was super unified. So the one that stands out in particular is as they're moving out, right before that last scene where the house collapses. The dad says, I have to go into the office. I'll be back early. Like, he specifically says that he'll be back early. All of a sudden, it's dark. She's by herself. The kids are going to bed. and then he comes back to rescue them from a late night adventure where the fucking house is collapsing in on itself and getting eaten by the closet.
No, I thought he said that he might be late, and if he is late, then to just let them sleep. Like, I thought he mentioned that.
He said the first line of that is that he says he's going to be home early, but if the kids fall asleep, let them sleep. Like it stuck out to me that he's like, I'll be home early, and then the very next scene it's like, put yourselves to bed, kids. Also answer the phone. Yeah. Like it just,
the thing that I don't really get about that is, like, after all that stuff that happened, I don't understand why they, like, stayed at the house. Like, if he was working, why didn't they just go to the hotel to begin with? No,
I was thinking about that too.
Like, that's the only plot point thing where I'm just kind of like, you know, I know why this entire thing, you know, why this part of the movie happens, but to me, I was just kind of thinking, like, it still kind of doesn't make sense logically, because I'm pretty sure that they would be at the hotel, you know.
Well,
right, and even still, like, to that extent with plot holes, right? That, like, they let the oldest daughter just evacuate the plot so many times. They could have just done without it by not writing in a teenage daughter. They literally wrote her in so that she could tell the comedy line of being familiar with the hotel, because like otherwise she served no purpose. Anything else important happened, she wasn't fucking there.
That's what I was gonna say. I just feel like they could have done without her. She could have not been a character. Her acting was terrible. I just did not enjoy her being on the screen at all. Plus, she was a forgettable character.
They forgot about her.
She had no purpose.
In the last scene, as they're driving away, she's standing there screaming, and the kid in the back seat is just like, "Dad, let's go!" They never show her getting in the car, and they just fucking drive away. And then they show the car without her in it. But
she walked towards it.
They then show the car without her in it.
No, she's in it. She gets in the car.
Right at, like, they never show the act of her getting in the car. The very next time that they show the car, she's not in it. They show the car again, and she is in it. But, like, the very next scene after, like, it's implied that she's in the car. She's not in the car. She's not physically in the fucking car. Like, it was
that up to a filming error.
Yeah.
Sure, fine. So be it. It wasn't important enough for them to film it correctly. Like, there are plot holes in this that still drive you a little nuts. My last dislike before I cede the floor. There's a lot of points of this, especially in the first half, that drag unnecessarily. The end, you kind of feel it a little bit that it drags, but I think it's important enough pieces that it's allowed to drag. It wouldn't feel so bad, because the beginning, like, the moment with the chair being dragged across the floor was like a 6-minute scene. They could have done that in 45 seconds.
Yeah.
I think it took away from how long the end of the film took. Not that the end of the film was bad. If you just watched the second half of this film, nothing would feel like it dragged. Again, it was pretty well done.
Right.
But because the first half had moments like that, you started to feel it when it was important for you not to. And I think that's my bigger detraction than the actual scenes that did drag.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of times where it felt slow. I think, for me, the start of the movie, it felt slow but rushed.
Yeah.
I mean, just her waking up and walking downstairs and talking to something in the TV right off the bat with, like, no explanation. Like, I get it got explained. It just felt... But it felt like it was just a, hey, let's jump right into it and then backtrack. It's just the vibe I got. I know it didn't exactly do that, but there were a lot of slower moments. I thought the movie was over when they were moving out of the house, and then
this movie kind of ends twice. That's my gripe, is that this movie kind of ends twice. I understand why they have the...
It wasn't bad.
No, I don't
think a bad thing. I just don't think that they needed the rest of it. I
Right.
also, one of my biggest dislikes is that when the monster thing shows up in front of the door, they just use the MGM lion voice.
I did notice that. It made me giggle so fucking hard.
It's just the MGM lion, and I'm like, hey, I heard that earlier.
The first time wasn't so bad when
That
they
had to-
when they
that had
repeated
to be
it 3
done on
times over.
purpose.
Oh, 100%.
That had to be done on purpose. That had to be in like Toby Hooper and Steven Spielberg probably passing a joint with each other. Like, you would be really hilarious.
Like, it was
Put the
funny.
MG
I just
put the
hated
M-
it.
Let's put the MGM lion voice in there to see if people notice.
Yeah, by the 3rd time, if you didn't get it, they were going to smack you over a bat with it for the 4th time for it to occur. God damn.
Hey, did you know it's made by MGM? I don't know. I don't have too many dislikes. Like, I find it hard to judge these movies, especially the ones that I picked, because they are older. We have
because she picked them.
Okay, well, that too. No, because there are many dislikes about last week's, but I think that with how, like, obviously now we have progressed more in creating things that things look better. So judging visually on the movie, I think it's done pretty well, aside from the really crappy CGI scenes that
The very
awful.
opposite puppetry.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just find it hard to judge these movies. I mean, they're older. They're good for their time.
Right.
But I enjoyed this one. I really did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have like a lot of complaint. But then again, I'm also a lot more forgiving of like a lot of, outdated stuff because
We know.
Yeah, because you literally said movies stopped being good in 1981.
I didn't say movies, I said werewolf movies. There's a difference.
Well, based on the 5 we watched, I'd say they weren't good before then either, but I get it. You guys have anything else you want to get out before we get out of here?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all.
All right.
The remake sucks.
Oh yeah, no,
Don't watch it.
that one's bad. It's rushed. The acting's terrible. The characters are terrible. The story's terrible. As a whole, it's just terrible.
I love that we can't get out of any of these podcasts without reviewing a movie we didn't actually watch. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow. What the fuck are we watching next?
Scream.
Yeah, so we'll be back tomorrow with Scream, more of Hayley's picks. As always, you can hop in the Discord and watch movies with us. If we're not watching movies actively, I'm sure by the time you're seeing this, we'll be thinking about the podcast again. So, plus we do community events, so you can always just hop in and hope stuff happens, because usually it does. I get bored and need friends. You can also check us all out individually on Twitch. Stallman at Reductus, Hayley at Hayley_bug18, myself at Ted Green Eagles. And I think that wraps us up here. So we will see you here tomorrow.
See ya.